Hi everyone, it's Dr. Adams. I'm going to quickly review the key aspects of Chapter 1 of our Linguistics text. You need to read all of it. You should have read it last week, answered some questions, but I just want to make sure that you really hit on those important parts. So I'm going to go through quickly, pause the video where you'd like. Here, the beginning section, there's nothing really super important, so I think I'm just going to go right through. Okay, important but not key. Okay, moving on to, I'm up to page 22. First language acquisition. This is really important to understand. When we think about first language acquisition, this is our first language, our native language, our home language, our heritage language, whatever you want to call it. And we now know, and there's a lot of theories, but we now know that really children acquire language. And there's a super interesting study. If you go back, I'll see if I can find it and post it, about babies babbling, and that when babies are exposed to language, they begin to babble with their language sounds. So if you have a baby that's exposed to American English, or a Japanese baby, or an Arabic baby, or a Finnish baby, by the age of 1, 2, 3 months, they begin babbling in those sounds that we might not have, like, for example, in Arabic with a h sound. We don't have that in American English. And babies begin acquiring those sounds. It's the first thing they do is with those phonemes. And you know about phonemes now, and it's the smallest unit of sound. Then they move from that babble to really putting phonemes together and making bigger sounds to words, and then they actually get to two-word phrases, and they continue. If babies are exposed to 2 languages at once, they're bilingual, same thing. They learn those babbling sounds, and they acquire those sounds, and they begin to learn the language. We don't teach 2 and 3-year-olds grammar rules. We don't teach them vocabulary. We don't sit down. I mean, you may read them books, but they don't have lessons. They learn the language through immersion. And this is really where the field has moved to when we think about teaching second language. Long gone are those days where we'd sit down with the grammar book and have the grammar translation and the closed sentences, exercises. I mean, if you think back to your high school, some of you here are newer high school graduates. Some of you graduated 30 years ago. I graduated probably, 30? I graduated in 84, I guess. No, high school? 86. And I took 3 years of French. I didn't know anything at the end of those 3 years because it was just out of that book study, and I just had to do those exercises, yada, yada, yada. Yet, I went to France and I was there for 3 weeks. Holy mackerel! You learn it when you're immersed. And this is what we now know about teaching language. We want to really go to whole language and give those students everything we can with the whole experience. So this is why it's important to understand first language acquisition. There's a lot of theories of first language acquisition. You don't need to know them anymore because we now have a better understanding, although you shouldn't know about behavioral theory, but that's okay. You learn about that in psychology. We have a better understanding of the current view of language acquisition through Chomsky, and you're going to learn about Chomsky later in this chapter, I think, and the idea of universal grammar, and that we acquire through acquisition. So make sure you read this part as well. And then there's insights from psychology. Those of you who have taken psychology, it's really interesting. So make sure you read that as well closely. We don't have to worry about signed language as much. I mean, it's interesting, but it's not a key focus. Insights from sociology, anthropology, the environment. These are a couple interesting studies. You can read these as well. And let's see, yada, 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 focus on the language. Okay, that's great. I'm going to move on to the next section. Great. Now I jumped ahead to page 40. And again, this still talks about how children acquire language. And we know that they don't learn explicit grammar. And I know those of you who met Henry, the funniest thing is we loved it. And he'd say, we'd be in the car and he'd really have to go to the bathroom. We'd have to go to the bathroom. He'd say, we had to stop. We stopped. Finally, we'd stop. And we'd say, you'd have to go. And he said, it goed away. It goed away. And we never would sit down and say, well, go is an irregular verb. And, today we go, but yesterday we went. In the future we will go. We don't teach that children eventually pick up that it's an irregular verb, and he'd say, it went away. So they talk a little bit about this, how children learn the linguistic rules of grammar without being explicitly taught. Again, this is informing how we need to better be a teacher for our L2 learners, that we want to take this approach of this whole language and not sitting there and teaching these explicit grammar rules. This is different for older learners when you get up to high school and they've already understand this, but right now for our younger learners, this is a really key aspect that we take away from L1 acquisition in order to teach L2. Okay, implicit, explicit rules. So read all this. This is really key. Same thing with children's errors. They talk about this as well. So read this. It gives a lot of examples that we just really correct through usage. Steven Pinker has a lot of research, so read about Pinker. And then, let's see, active construction of grammar theory. This is a theory that you should read. It's key. You can see my notes here from my own book. And you want to get an idea of this. And this is the same idea that children begin to figure out. They figure out their grammar, just like the example I gave you with Henry. He knew he wanted to use the past tense of go, and it ended with ed. He never learned that, so he said, I goed, or it goed away, or I bide that book. And this is the idea that children without learning grammar are beginning to understand how to apply grammar rules. It's fascinating. Of course, it's not right, because when you have it in irregular verbs, you see it's not right. But this is how we know, because of those irregular verbs, that they're applying their own grammar rules to it. It's fascinating, and this is how they begin to learn. So a lot of linguists understand this theory, so make sure you get that. Summary insights from linguists. Make sure, this is all about universal grammar. This is Chomsky. You need to know this. Money back guarantee. All of this will be on your certification exam. The idea that humans are born with the ability to learn grammar. And it's a universal grammar. And it doesn't matter if you're born and you're a Chinese learner, you're an English learner, you're a Spanish learner. Whatever you're put in, whatever language you're immersed in, you're going to learn those grammar rules. And this is the idea that humans have this innate ability to learn grammar. Where other creatures that have language. We know chimps and apes have languages. We know that whales have languages. They don't necessarily have that ability of grammar, different grammars depending on where they are. So make sure that you read Chomsky. He's really important. He's key to our field. Okay, theories of language acquisition. Yeah, okay, so that's a review. The conclusions are great. So always review your conclusions for all our chapters. That's it. That's a quick review, and we'll see you later.